In step 7, we describe market segments. We already know the nature of the market segments. We understand which segmentation variables characterize them. But if we want to select one or a small number of target segments and come up with the right marketing mix for them, we need to know a lot more about them. This is where segment description comes in. In segment description, we use additional information about consumers. Visualizations help us to gain insight into differences in descriptor variables between segments. Because descriptor variables have not been used to extract the segments, we can now also test for statistically significant differences across segments. Ideally, we want segments to be very different from each other. That allows us to develop marketing action plans targeting the segment we want to cater to. Let's have a look at 2 visualizations first. This is a mosaic plot. The mosaic plot is a graphical representation of a cross tabulation. We can use it to visualize differences between market segments in categorical, binary, or ordinal variables. Admittedly, this one takes a bit of getting used to, but when you know how to read it, it becomes really useful. This particular mosaic plot looks at differences across segments in income. Segments are represented by columns. Income categories are shown in rows. Each rectangle is one segment income category combination. The size of the rectangle indicates how many respondents fall in each cell. If the rectangles are white, the number of consumers in each cell is in line with expectations. The expectation is that segment membership and the descriptor variable are independent of one another. This means we expect that statistically there is no significant difference between the segments in this descriptor. Cells that are colored point to statistically significant differences. If the cells are red, the number of consumers in the cell is significantly lower than expected. If the cells are blue, the number of consumers in the cell is significantly higher than expected. In this particular mosaic plot, we can see that members of segment 3 are less frequently in the lowest income category than expected. That members of segment 4 are more frequently in the highest income category than expected, and that members of segment 6 are less frequently in the highest income category than expected. If we want to visualize differences across segments with respect to a metric variable, we can use a so-called parallel box and whisker plot, or parallel box plot. The parallel box plot shows the distribution of the metric variable for each segment. We discussed the single box plot in step 4, when we used it to explore data. In this parallel box plot, for example, you can see the distribution of the moral obligation to protect the environment score for each of 6 segments. The notches in the box plot are helpful to assess if the differences between the median values for each segment are statistically significant. If the notches of the 2 segments do not overlap, it's strong evidence that the difference between them is significant. Visualizations are great for exploring differences between segments. But if we're going to build a long-term strategy on the basis of our segmentation solution, we need to rigorously test differences between the segments with respect to descriptor variables. We can use 2 different approaches. We can test for differences variable by variable. In this case, we conduct 1 test per descriptor variable. If the descriptor variable is categorical, binary, or ordinal, we can use the chi-square test. If the descriptor variable is metric, we can use analysis of variance. The problem with testing separately for each variable is that we ignore associations between descriptor variables. This leads to an overestimation of the statistical significance of each descriptor. To avoid this, we can use methods that simultaneously test for differences in all descriptor variables. These include regression analysis, binary logistic regression to compare one target segment with all others, multinomial logistic regression if we have more than 2 segments, or tree-based methods. We discuss these methods in more detail later. You can also have a look at the demos to see how we can visualize and statistically test for differences between segments in R.